Thank you, Noreen, and thank you to the NEC for hosting this DE&I Summit. It's great to be here. And as Noreen said, I'm a huge NEC fan. I'm also a graduate of FDU, their management school, so thank you. Go Knights! So I'm here with, Noreen said, I worked at the New York Times 30 years, and I'm here with two of my old colleagues at the New York Times. We spent decades together, and gentlemen in the room, what Tarek said about reporting to a female is probably going to happen because I was the managing director. My executive director at the Times was a female. My vice president at the New York Times above her was a female. My chief advertising officer above her was a female. The senior vice president was a female, and at the time I worked there, our CEO was a female. So I had five all the way up the ladder, so that will probably happen. Plus, and then I had my CEO at home, my wife. So it all worked out. But with me here today is my colleague, and so you can tell I'm getting a little older, I'm the next generation, is Desiree Dancy. Desiree is a recognized HR leader credited with influencing galvanizing thinking at the senior executive level to drive the integration of DE&I, talent acquisition, and talent management strategies. Currently, Desiree is the Group Vice President of Talent Inclusion at Sims Limited, a global recycling company. And Desiree had the great pleasure when I worked at the New York Times. She was our chief diversity officer, and we had a lot of really good times. And we made some really good business cases around diversity. To her left is Marci Kraft. Marci is a renowned legal expert and trusted advisor in the field of labor and employment law. She enjoyed an extensive career as VP and Assistant General Counsel of the New York Times, guiding executive management development implementations of strategies, policies, practical business solutions, and concerning all aspects of labor, employment, and HR issues. And I always said to Marci, someday I want to read her book because, oh my God, her door was always closed, and she always had people in her office. So someday I'm going to read her book. So Catrice and Tarek have done a great job of laying the groundwork of what DE&I is in the world today. So let's just jump right in. Desiree's going to talk from an HR standpoint, and Marci's going to give her from a legal standpoint of handling certain situations and questions. And we'll leave it open at the end for questions from the group. So Desiree, when focusing on attracting and retaining personnel or student athletes, why is it important to focus on DE&I?
Sure. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Noreen, for having me. As you said, Catrice and Tariq have really done a great job of laying out the foundation. Specifically, can you hear me? Specifically around the business case, right? Each organization has its own business case, but it's not enough to have a business case. You need to have a business case that is supported by your leadership and communicated throughout the organization so that each and every employee, when you talk about having a diverse and inclusive organization, they know exactly what it means for your institution. And each institution is different. You cannot take a cookie cutter approach. I know during the Q&A with Catrice, someone asked about having a strategy that covers all of your different schools. In my role at Sims, I have what they call a group role, which is essentially I oversee DE&I for the organization globally. And so while my strategy is very much a global strategy, the expectation in delivering on that strategy is very much based on the regions where we're at, knowing that the United States is different from Australia, is different from the UK in how we look to achieve that strategy. So again, we have a global strategy, but how we get there is not cookie cutter. The other piece to it, which is I think very, very critical, is the intentionality. You must be intentional about making the change. You must be intentional about delivering on the business case. And Catrice spoke to this a little bit. It does not happen overnight. It is a journey. And you will have stops and you will have starts. You will hit roadblocks and you will have to step back. You will have to recalibrate. You'll have to ask yourself what's working, what's not working. Even in my industry, today, 2019, China tariffs, right? They're hitting us hard. So we have to think about, how do we approach our DE&I strategy? What do we have to do a little bit differently because of the changes in just the business in and of itself, right? And so those are things that you have to be mindful of. And that intentionality of saying, okay, I'm not going to take my foot off the gas completely. I may ease up. I'm going to remain focused, but I will approach it a little bit differently is so critical. But every single day we come in to do this work very much focused on making a difference.
Thanks, Desiree. Could you just expound a little bit on what Tarek was saying, or talking about unconscious bias, about level setting in that particular piece, because we all have unconscious biases.
Absolutely. When I first started at Sims, almost 3 years, in fact, today is my 3rd year anniversary. Wow, okay, yay me. when I first started, they had actually launched our D&I committees, and the committee members were really excited and anxious to get started on the work. And one of the very first things that they wanted to focus on was unconscious bias. And after being there for about a month or two and getting a lay of the land, I kind of hit the reset button on the unconscious bias. And the reason I did that is because unconscious bias is, for lack of a better term, the hot ticket item, if you will, around D&I today. But I think it's so important that organizations understand what diversity and inclusion means for their organization first, right? When you talk about diversity at your institution, what exactly does that mean for your institution? When you talk about having an inclusive environment, what does that mean? And then you can start to level set on unconscious bias and start to bring that conversation around how do you mitigate the decision making that we bring to the table when we have unconscious bias. So I think there are steps to approaching your D&I strategy, and unconscious bias is not the panacea that everyone thinks it is. It's a part of the strategy, but it's not the end-all, be-all to making an inclusive and diverse organization.
Great, thank you, Desiree. So earlier, Marci, Patrice talked about the leadership career programs, like you have to build a workforce, you have to launch it, you have to advance it. So along the way in a person's career, whether it be in the corporate world or in the institutions that we have here today, the schools, what are some of the HR and legal issues that bump up against each other through every person's professional career cycle, whether you're in the private sector, the schools, corporate America? What are some of the HR? Because I bet there's a lot of legal issues.
Well, this whole area, I think, operates in tandem, both on the HR side and on the legal side, because things that you say or you do throughout as the supervisor or as the influencer or as the person who has the power over someone else, anything that you say and you do can affect them in their work life, both culturally as well as legally. And what I have found, we all worked at the Times together. And what I have found since I have left the Times and I am now developing my own consulting firm, that it doesn't really matter where you are, whether you are at a company that you had been in for quite a number of years, whether you are in an educational institution, whether you are in a nonprofit business, whether whatever the environment is that you are in, it seems to me, and what I'm learning, frankly, is that many of the issues are the same because people are really people. And what people want to feel and how they want to be treated professionally and with respect, the things that Tarek had touched upon, the things that we learned this morning, I think that everything is, there's a similarity to the way in which people want to be treated. So when you start your career in whatever area you start, how the people who can influence your career, treat you, does impact you from the moment that you, let's say what you folks do, either you interview people or you are interviewed for a job, right? So sometimes you have two roles, right? You are both perhaps the applicant and the employee and maybe even, the hiring manager or the recruiter. So you see it from both sides. But how you are treated from the first time that you make contact with someone all the way through your career, through the various steps that happen in your career, both have the HR and the DE&I implications as well as the legal implications. And what I think the law does is creates guardrails where you can't maybe get outside of a particular area. And there are certain words you can't use, and there are certain things you can't say. And when you're interviewing someone, I'm sure that you may get guidelines about things you can say and things you can't say. For example, excuse me, you're not going to ask somebody anything that is not job related. It's sort of an overall kind of guide that I would give you. Frankly, I think that not only is it lawful to do that, and it's not lawful to say, how many kids do you have? How are you going to get to work? Are you planning on having a family? Because you're presupposing all sorts of things about that person, and I don't think that that's going to make the person feel comfortable. Desiree certainly isn't going to be happy if you ask those questions. And frankly, neither am I, because it's not job related. Now, what what Noreen has mentioned to us is that you have a need and you have a desire to try and attract a more diverse workforce. And you might even have a specific need where you want to maybe increase, maybe in the coaching and in the athletic director area, you may want to increase women because we saw some of the statistics, right? Well, let's just take that as an example. Not just women, but let's just take this as an example. You want to increase women in that area. So what do you do about that? Maybe there are those who traditionally are the ones who are the homemakers or who are the ones who have to stay home and take care of the family, or they're the ones that have to arrange for the child care. So what do you do if you want to attract those people? What you can do, instead of asking somebody if they have kids, because either that's going to cause you to maybe eliminate that person, because you know that if you're a coach, you're going to be traveling all over the place, and how are you going to arrange for childcare? The better approach, and I think what we're all trying to embrace here, and I think a lot of the schools are doing, and I think you have lots of programs now, where you are trying to market yourself, and I think this goes to what Tarek says, you're trying to market yourself as attractive to people who have those needs. So rather than ask somebody how many kids they have, or if they're looking to start a family, what you can do is you can tout what the programs are that you have that would attract people who have those kinds of special needs. And there are all kinds of organizations that can help you do that. There's all kinds of focus groups that can teach you who it is that might be available, those groups that you can tap into that Tarek was talking about. So there are ways that you can embrace diversity and inclusion without running afoul of the law, and you can accomplish what you want to accomplish, and then you'll make both of us happy.
Great, thank you, Marci. So Desiree, we heard a lot, especially from Tarek, about a strategy in recruiting. So what are, in your opinion, because you led the charge at the Times getting a diverse workforce, what are some of the best practices in conducting a search that builds a strong candidate pool and maxes by the ability to ultimately hire the individuals that represent your company.
Sure, sure. You know, it's certainly about getting out of your comfort zone, right? It's that proverbial, you know, casting a wide net. And, you know, I've worked not only at the Times, but in other industries, started my career in financial services, and it served very true, especially many years ago, I won't say when, to really do targeted outreach. Really think about where you're recruiting today and where you can recruit tomorrow. And that could very much be going out to historically black colleges and universities. It can be going out to women's schools, universities, wherever you're, you know, if you're looking for more women, you know, are there institutions that have a critical mass that you can tap into. It's also looking at professional organizations that are geared towards a particular group. So when Mark and I were at the New York Times Company, you know, we did a lot with the National Black MBA. We did a lot with the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. We did a lot with the Asian American Journalists Association. We did a lot with Women in Media, right? So there are definitely organizations that you can reach out to. And even before, you know, getting into professional, you know, look at different schools at the high school level that you can tap into that are very much focused on women. And I think that's, you know, very critical, is having that outreach. If you are using any type of recruiting agency, executive recruiters, et cetera, build that into your contract, that there is a diversity clause, that when they present candidates to you, that that candidate slate must be diverse, and have no problem pushing back and saying, well, okay, you just sent me 10 candidates for this position, this role, and I don't see a whole lot of gender diversity or ethnic diversity in this candidate slate. You know, as a client of a recruiting company, you can certainly do that, right? The other piece is the marketing material that you use. And, you know, certainly we all, you know, we saw Tariq's presentation, and you just saw that great diversity in terms of the physical representation of what people look like, whether that's through gender or race or ethnicity, right? So you definitely want to make sure that your marketing material is an honest representation of who your organization is, and you can get out there and use a lot of stock, you know, photos, but at the same time making sure that, you know, one, this is who we really are, and then, you know, to some extent, a little bit aspirational. So making sure your marketing material is reflective of the diversity that you already have, and to the extent the diversity that you want to have. The other piece to that is also around talking about who you are as an organization and your culture. I think it's so important to talk about the different policies, the different benefits, and so forth that you have in your organization that can attract individuals to your company. And Marci, you talked a little bit about that in terms of, you know, if you have got a great backup daycare, you know, program, make sure that's in your marketing materials, right? If you have great flexible work arrangements, make sure that's in your marketing materials, right? You want to highlight those things that are going to be attractive to maybe that non-traditional candidate, right? But the important piece for me really is about the outreach, right? Casting a wider net and making sure that you're not fishing in the same stream that you've always fished in. Broaden it, go out there and tap, you know, populations that you might not necessarily tap, because that adage of, well, they're not out there, does not hold true. It simply does not hold true. There are talented women, there are talented men, talented people of color, you know, whatever that kind of diversity is that you're trying to pull into your particular institution, the talent is there. You just have to work a little harder at getting it.
Great, thanks, Desiree. One of the things when Desiree and Marci would send me out for the company to recruit, one of the things I did, because everybody thinks everybody at the New York Times, we're all writers. We actually, more than half the company, 3/4 of the company are not writers, we're marketing, we're sales, all the other thing, engineers. And so what I did, and I think everybody in this room would appreciate this, I memorized every Division I mascot. Because I knew when I went to the Black MBA, the Hispanic MBA, I'm the white guy there, right? I'm obviously not a minority, but when a kid would walk by from Baylor, I'd say, "Go Bears." "Oh my God, you know the Bears? Yeah, great football, great basketball. I love Waco." I've never been to Waco in my life. Next kid walks by and they're from Cal, and I say, "Go Bears" again, or whatever the school might be, or the Maryland Go Terps. I'd get him to come into our booth. And I said, "Look, we got a lot. What was your major? What are you looking to do?" And then I'd hand him off to our manager. That was our marketing manager. Hand him off to our engineering department, whatever it might be. And it was my way of connecting with somebody that I didn't know. So I think when you're out trying to recruit new student athletes, have something prepared like that in your back pocket to help you out. So.
Can I just piggyback on that? And I think for me, the important thing, especially in the recruiting process, is it's not enough just to have that person's resume or CV in front of you. Read it, right? Take the time to study it, get to know that person, at least on paper, so that you can find those points of commonality. Do a little bit of research if you have to. If something appears on someone's, resume that you're not familiar with, it's like, I haven't heard of that particular organization or that particular, whatever it may be. Let me see what this is about so that when the candidate is in front of you, you've taken the time to get to know the person on paper, and it may even provide you with a point of commonality.
Great. So Marci, on the same question, can you talk about what you can, like a cultural fit? Are you a cultural fit? Can you talk about stuff? Are you a cultural fit? Can those things be done in an interview and just expound upon and stuff like that?
Well, the word cultural fit is a bit provocative. And frankly, I'm not even sure what that means. What's the safest, I think, and what is the most productive, legally as well as from an HR point of view, is focusing on what the job requirements are and focusing on whether or not that individual has those skills to fit those job requirements. Then you won't get, a call from me hollering at you. And you'll also, frankly, you'll get information that's relevant to what it is that you want that person to do. I don't know what cultural fit means. I know that if you're looking for someone who has had some experience in some particular area that you're looking for, and that person has the experience, then that matters. And if they don't, maybe you want to talk about how it is you ask the person. You don't have this experience, but how is it that you think that you're qualified to do that job? Get the job description in front of you and talk to the person about the job description. And ask them, if you've got certain things here, how does it match up? How does it marry up? First of all, you'll get what you need, I think, and in order to make an informed decision. You won't err into some dangerous, murky legal areas. And frankly, what cultural fit means to you, I don't know, is that sort of a code word for being exclusionary? It's not going to help you, and I think you'll probably exclude people who could be fabulous candidates for you anyway. So I think in all of those respects, looking to see what is a fit is too much work. You want to see whether the person, the skills are relevant, and perhaps even how they can add to what it is that you need. That would be my recommendation.
I 100% agree. And in my organization, I've been talking a lot about culture add. getting our managers to shift the mindset from this notion of culture fit to looking at candidates from the perspective of what can this person add to our organization. Certainly, you know, they have to be able to do the job, but you also want them to be able to bring a certain amount of gravitas, if you will, in certain roles. You want them to bring maybe a different type of experience to the organization. You know, I think about my company, it's a global recycling company. We're a kind of down and dirty organization in terms of the work that gets done day to day. And most of the people who work at our organization, whether they work in operations or they work in administrative, they come from blue-collar backgrounds, right? And you know, now as a global company who is growing, we are starting now, especially 2019, you know, expanding our footprint, wanting to be around for another 100 years. We're bringing in people who have never worked, like myself, in a recycling company. And so if they had to look at someone like myself and think about it from the context of global fit or culture fit, I would have never been considered a candidate. But when you spin it on its head and say, how can we add to our culture? How can we take someone with a corporate background and say, what are you bringing to this organization? That's where we're now making a difference. And so when I have that conversation with our leaders, I'm starting to see the light bulbs go off, you know, as we start to bring in, you know, different talent, not so much about culture fit, but culture add.
Thanks, Desiree. So Marci, since we have all these great institutions here in the room, let's have this question focus on what they can do at their individual schools. As a leader, since we have all leaders in this room, and they're trying to build a successful and inclusive culture, what are some of the important issues emphasized? And I mean, we hear Title IX a lot out there. We hear about, you know, different, I think there was the Hofstra tennis case that just recently came around. From a legal standpoint, can you talk about it as it relates to universities and colleges out there?
Sure. The thing that I would recommend, and it's really not rocket science, is once you get people to come, how do you keep them there? How do you keep everybody, frankly, feeling as if they matter? And that's how you operate in your institution on a day-to-day basis by listening, by making people feel as if they have a problem and they can come to you, you will hear them. Now, it's for your employees, it's for your students, of course. You've got a lot of constituents that you have to satisfy. But I think that in every institution, what makes an institution successful from a personnel standpoint is, look, you got a lot of people. And whenever you got a lot of people, you may have some problems, right? People may misbehave. People may treat people in ways that perhaps they shouldn't. But what you do about it and how you react is so important. You should have your standards. You should have your protocols. If somebody feels that they have been mistreated in whatever way, whether it's a serious infraction, perhaps something discriminatory, maybe harassment, whatever it is that they're alleging, you have to have a process and a protocol which allows them to voice their concerns, and then you deal with it in a particular way, and so that the next person knows that it's been handled and that they can come to someone somewhere so that it will be addressed. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to go the way that the accuser wants, but that they've been heard and there is a protocol. And I know that, especially in the education arena, there's an awful lot of scrutiny on how universities are reacting to claims that are made about inappropriate conduct, whether it's especially obviously towards students. whether it's students accusing other students or faculty or administrators being accused. And so Mark brought up this case that I had discussed with him, the Hofstra case. And it's a good example of how to act and how not to act. So the case involved and it's a recent case, just was decided. Case involved a tennis coach, women's and men's tennis coach, and he was male. He still is. And so he was accused by one of the students, tennis players. He was accused, the athlete, of harassment, inappropriate conduct, inappropriate remarks, both towards her as well as to other females. And it got a lot of attention. And so he was brought before whatever the body was, the investigator, to explain whatever his side of the story was. And there was an awful lot of public scrutiny. There was a lot of publicity about it. There was a lot of talk about it internally on the social media internally at the school. And he had another side to that story. And his side to the story was that this student had a scholarship, and there was according to this student, there was a prior commitment, or the prior athletic director or coach to extend the scholarship. And so she wanted to make sure that that was going to happen. And he saw no record of that promise, and so he said, I can't do it next year, maybe in the years after. And her father got involved, and there was accusations about that. And the next thing that he knows, this is what he says, the next thing that he knows is he was charged with harassment. Whether or not he said or did some of the things that they say, for purpose of this conversation, is irrelevant. We don't know. But what happened is that the school was subject to so much scrutiny that a couple of months later, they said that he would get a hearing. They said that he would be able to submit his own statement. They said that he would be able to, he gave them a list of people that he thought could shed some light on this, could testify. And they said, and this was in keeping with a lot of their protocol. I'm sure a lot of the schools, you all have all sorts of protocol in this area. A lot of strict rules that steps that you have to follow. Well, they didn't follow it because they were subject to so much scrutiny. And I think, unfortunately, the publicity about a male being accused, especially a teacher or a coach, being accused of harassment against a female student was so overwhelming, they fired the guy. He sues the school. And eventually, and there was an appeal, and eventually it went up to high court in New York State, and they said, you didn't do this right. You didn't follow your rules, and you, as the accused, should have gotten basically your day in court. You should have been able to speak to your side of the story. And so now, the university lost the case. So the moral of all of that is everybody should have a fair shake. If you've got rules, if you've got protocols that you're supposed to follow, when you get a claim of some kind, make sure that you follow them because it could backfire on you. We all know that everybody is subject to so much of this scrutiny, especially in this era, in this particularly sensitive area, and you're talking about students, with people of authority. But don't overreact. Make sure that whatever you do, you follow the rules that you're supposed to follow, and then however it shakes out, it shakes out. But be prepared. If you overreact, you're going to get in just as much trouble as if you don't react.
Thank you, Marci. So Desiree, same question. We heard Catrice talk earlier about, opening doors, be a way maker, embrace longevity. What can the leaders in this room do for their staffs, for their student athletes to embrace that?
Sure. I'll answer that question, but I do want to piggyback on Marci and the whole process with the protocols and standards that you have. And it does tie into leadership and what you can do. And it's about accountability and holding people accountable. Follow the process, but then hold people accountable. I came from financial services, and there were people who we called rainmakers because they brought in X number of dollars, and they, at some point in time, could pretty much rule the roost. And companies saw that by allowing these individuals to demonstrate behavior that was not inclusive, right? Demonstrate behavior that cut across the company's values, that did not support the company's values, were creating situations that the organization did not want to be in, right? And because they weren't holding them accountable, company X got a bad reputation. And so when you think about your role as a leader, yes, make sure you follow all the rules, the protocols, the standards when you have a complaint, but hold people accountable. The other thing that I want to speak about, and to your question here, in terms of a leader, it is very important that you walk the walk, right? You think about what it means to be inclusive every day. As I said earlier, it's about being intentional. So when you walk into your offices in the morning, you think about who you said good morning to. You think about who you asked if they had a good weekend, right? Because you are really role modeling that behavior. You have to engage with all of your students, all of your colleagues. I remember doing a DE&I course, not dissimilar to this in many ways, and one of the managers walked out and said, Desiree, thank you so much for this. I realized that this really wasn't about diversity and inclusion. This was really about me being a good manager, right? So when you think about all of the kind of examples that Tariq has shared and Catrice has shared and the things that we've talked about up here in terms of appreciating diversity, appreciating difference, right? Leaning in to being uncomfortable, right? Really creating that inclusive leadership, that's just about being a good leader. So as leaders, take that away, that really this work is about you upping your leadership game. And it's also going to be about incentivizing people on some level to do good, right? Working at the Times, we had as part of our performance management process where diversity and inclusion was a part of your leadership competencies that you were evaluated on. Your bonus was tied to that, right? It was really about, hey, you know what, this is what we expect you to do. We're going to measure you on it, and if you don't perform to the level that we need you to perform, then we will have to hold you accountable for that. So when you think about it in its entirety, it's really about tying it to positive behaviors, making sure that you hold individuals accountable, and really walking the talk, I should say, when you're talking about DE&I from a leadership perspective.
Thank you, Desiree. Okay, ladies, we have less than 10 minutes, so 2-minute answers, and then we have a couple of questions from the audience. We'll start with you, Marci. What would you consider the most evolving issue that institutions and athletic department leadership should focus on in the diversity and inclusion space as we move forward here into 2020?
Well, I think right now the hot stuff is Me Too, and connected to that, I think, is the impact of social media. Anything that you do or you say, somebody will hear about and will know about within moments. And so just be mindful that everything that you do will be scrutinized. Get some help, talk to some people within your organization if you have a question, if you have an issue, and just whenever you're making decisions about how to act or how to react to something, take into account how that will play on the public stage. I'm not saying that you need to react simply because of that, but that ought to be in the mix when you're trying to figure out what to do about whatever the issue is that you're tackling, whether it's positive or negative. That's my thought.
Great, thank you, Marci. Desiree?
Same question.
Same
yeah.
question. I know it's a loaded one.
Yep. Well, social media is huge, right? Students are not afraid to pull out their iPhone and videotape a conversation and Snapchat it.
That you might not even know that they're doing.
Snapchat it to their social circles and get messaging out there, and things do go viral. So you really do need to be mindful of the fact that social media does not allow you to sweep issues under the rug or push them behind closed doors like they did years ago, right? It's open now. The other piece that I would say is critical to this environment is when you think about sports, it's really activism through sporting events. And I want to say it was Harvard a couple of weeks ago.
Harvard, yeah.
Climate change, nothing to do with the football game, but they shut it down, right? And they were willing to shut it down. And so you really do have to take the social media component, the activism component into consideration around all of your sporting activities at your respective institutions.
Thanks, Desiree. And just on a personal note, I'm a high school basketball referee, and the final, we actually have to get relicense every year, and so the final, from the commissioner's final thought is, do not be a YouTube moment. If somebody's getting in your case from the stands, if the coaches are on your case, he goes, bite your tongue and walk away. And as you as leaders in your institutions, I'm sure you get, you got that NEC championship game, and the referee, I might miss a call. I'm a human being, we just gotta, react accordingly, because it could be, as Desiree and Marci, somebody could be filming you. So I just throw it out to you as a personal note. Okay, so we have a time for, we have less than 5 minutes. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. Any questions from the crowd for Desiree and Marci? Yes.
So you talked about cultural fit, and in my experience, sometimes I've observed that some organizations don't know what their culture is, so whenever they're looking for candidates to fit their culture, it becomes difficult. So what can institutions do to kind of set that standard around their values and culture so that they're appropriately selecting those candidates that match with those values and culture too?
Yeah, that honestly is a whole body of work, right? Seriously, to define your culture and your values is really going to be about getting the key stakeholders of your institution in a room, putting pen to paper or however you note take, and really talk about what your company values, right? What are the things that are working in your company today? What are the things that you want to change? What are your aspirations? That is work that has to be done if you don't have a clear understanding of what your culture and your values are today. But it's not one person deciding what your culture and your values are, and it's the stakeholders, as I said. Not just the stakeholders from the context of who's sitting in the offices, but it's also your students, right? And how they today perceive the culture of the organization, what's working, what's not working, what do they perceive as the values of the organization, what's working, what's not working, right? So you've got to bring everyone who comes, a representative, I should say, of everyone who comes in contact with your organization into that mix to define what that culture and what those values are. But that's a big body of work to take on. But in the shorter term, you can get your key stakeholders together to really understand for a particular role what it is you're looking for. Like Marci said, what's the job description? What are we looking for in terms of skill sets? What are we looking for in terms of competencies? And use that hard and fast job description as a way to evaluate your candidates, as opposed to, well, I've got a feeling that this person is going to work out. You don't want to go that route.
Thank you. One more question we have time for. Yes, right here.
You talked about incentivizing tying leaders if we move into performance appraisal. And looking at some of those behaviors, can you elaborate on what that assessment looks like, how you're evaluating and seeing that as well?
Sure, and it kind of goes back to the culture and values, right, and the competencies. So in your performance management process, you should be evaluating employees on a certain set of competencies, right? As a leader, what do you expect from your leader, right? Is this leader inclusive? Is this leader collaborative? Does this leader seek out others for new ideas, right? I can't tell you what those competencies are for your organization. Those three were just off the top of my head of what I've experienced, but you should be evaluating all of your leaders on the same competencies, right? And then you can tie your inclusive behaviors, your diversity, whatever your incentive is around that, into those competencies. So if you're talking about inclusive leadership and you have a manager, a leader who is not collaborative, they have some work to do then.
And it's not how many of this color or how many of this gender did you hire? It's not that. It's that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Noreen, for the invitation today. And we'll be around the rest of the day if you want to talk to us one-on-one. Thank you for your time.
Thank you
And
very
go
much.
NEC. Thank you.
Thank you.